Welcome to Eye on Africa, your latest from across the continent. I'm Jean-Emile Jameen. Coming up on the show, an unspoken crisis emerges in Sudan as the country faces one of the world's longest school closures. According to Save the Children, millions of young students have missed nearly 500 days of learning since the war erupted in 2023. Then South Africa's iconic Kruger National Park reels from devastating floods with damage of over $30 million and 15 camps shut. Animals have escaped the worst, but tourism revenue and the future of the safari destination is at risk. Authorities now calling for urgent local and international support. And he's blitzed his way across Africa, and Lagos was his latest stop. Ishowspeed celebrated his 21st birthday while hitting 50 million subscribers, exploring markets, tasting jollof, and visiting the famed Nike art gallery. The YouTube star is turning his whirlwind tour into a global showcase of African culture, food, and creativity. Welcome to the show. We start this edition in Sudan, looking at a crisis that has received relatively little attention amidst the ongoing war, but whose urgency is no less severe. More than 8 million children have missed nearly 500 days of school since war broke out in 2023. Classrooms lie in ruins, teachers remain unpaid, and families are in a struggle to survive. To expand on these struggles, we're joined right now by Vishna Shah Little, Senior Director of child rights group Save the Children, the child rights charity in the United Kingdom. They are the ones who released that analysis of the 500 days missed by school children. Thank you so much for joining us. You've just been on a tour of Sudan, at least 3 major hubs, Vishna, in terms of Port Sudan, the Nile River, as well as Khartoum, the capital. Obviously not Darfur, where the war is at its strongest, but you have obviously got some wide-ranging testimonies. What have you seen?
Thank you very much for having me. As you said, I've just returned from Sudan, where we can see that half of the children who are school age today are out of school. They've been out of school for 500 days. And I had the chance to speak to so many children and their mothers in particular, who talked to me about what this crisis had meant for them. Their children talked about the fact that because they weren't going to school, it meant they weren't able to learn. There's so much pride in being able to learn in Sudan, but it also meant that many of the children did not have a safe place to be. They didn't have a space to play with their friends. And of course, many children rely on the school meals that are provided at the schools in order to get their basic food supplies. And so we know from everything we saw and from what we know, what it means when children don't go to school, is that children are at risk of being recruited into conflict. Children are at risk of being forced into child labor, child marriage. And of course, children suffer immensely from mental health crisis when they're not in school. I met many children who actually had fled from the center of the conflict today, from Darfur. I met a 13-year-old boy in a camp for displaced children, and he had fled from El Fasher. He had spent a month traveling to this camp for displaced people, and he had walked hundreds of miles. He was completely traumatized by what he told us. He talked about the violence he witnessed when he fled, the difficulties of fleeing, the dead bodies he saw on the side of the road, and this fear that he had felt through the whole journey. And now he's reached a camp where he feels sort of safe. And I asked him, how is he? And he said he's not okay. He's not happy. The first thing he talked about was, I want to go back to school. I want to play with my friends. I need medical help. And so his story is one of the same stories that 8 million children are facing today in Sudan, where everyone in some way or form is displaced. All the children have lost a generation of learning, and they're desperate to be able to just continue to be children and to have the same rights and opportunities as many other children do around the world. So for this young boy, he represents a bigger story, and it really emphasized to me the importance of making sure we get funding to Sudan, making sure we are supporting the conflict and the recovery efforts. I do.
If I can ask, Vishna, sorry, that is just one boy's testimony, and there are so many which have just evaporated almost in this deadly conflict. And obviously so many children themselves who have been killed. It is absolutely devastating. But just explain to us what it means to have a generation of lost education, 500 days.
Yeah, for children, when you have a lost generation of children who are not accessing education, it means that these children will never have the same chance of continuing education. Most of those children will potentially never go back to school. The girls will likely be forced into child marriage. The boys will be potentially recruited into conflict, forced to work. So these children, the longer they're out of school, the chances of them actually returning to school is it increases the unlikeliness of them being able to return to school. And today, many of these school buildings have been attacked, they have been occupied, and the school supplies have disappeared. The teachers are not being paid or are also displaced. So there is so much work to do, not only to get children back to school, but it's to rebuild the whole education system, because this is generations and generations of children now who have missed out on school. And there is so much work to do to get them back into education. There is a story of hope.
Yes, are there stories of hope? That's what I wanted to get to, because we definitely need something to clutch onto.
There are, and I was very, very lucky to visit a couple of girls' education schools, both in Khartoum and Port Sudan area, and they were the example of what it means to have access to education for children. They were schools where the girls had really good results because they had excellent teachers who were being paid. They had school feeding programs, so they got fed every day, so they were not malnourished. They had school supplies. They had a school library. Children had a voice in this school. And it meant that these children who were all displaced suddenly had hope. And they all told me that they come to this school, many of them walking long distances because they'd heard this was a good school. And so there is hope, because when you do invest in education, when you rebuild the system back again, children will come back to school, families will find a way of accessing education, and you can look for hope again, so some of these children can return to school and have their right to basic education, which every child should not have to fight for. Mm-hmm. Children are just victims in a conflict, and they deserve the right to school and education.
Vishna, very quickly, how do we make sure, in terms of international financing efforts and international help, that it goes to the right channels when helping these school children receive their education again?
There are so many mechanisms to make sure that you can fund the right organizations and local partners. So it's really about making sure that now there is an investment in Sudan, an investment in terms of long-term, flexible funding that comes immediately and is really trying to look at not just addressing the conflict as it is, but the rebuilding efforts that are very much needed. So that's the most important thing that we can do today. But alongside that, I would also stress that the international community and the wider community has such an important role to keep raising the attention on making sure we know that schools should always be protected in times of conflict. Children should always be protected, and make sure we keep these safety barriers around some critical areas for children. So I can't stress enough that the value of investment, because I saw it firsthand and I saw what education means for these children.
Vishna Shah Little, thank you so much for that message, coming to us as the Senior Director of Children's Rights at Save the Children charity in the UK. Let's move on now. And in Uvira, in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo, conflict has severely impacted the local economy. In mid-December, the border with neighboring Burundi closed after M23 rebels captured the city. Small businesses are at a standstill and prices have exploded. This report by Cedric Bendera, narrated by Emmett Livingston.
This market is one of the few in Uvira still operating. You can find vegetables and other produce in the stalls, but the market is much emptier than it once was. In mid-December, when M23 rebels captured Uvira, which lies on the border with Burundi, the Burundian government quickly closed the border crossing. Amina is worried. Clients are hard to come by.
I sell spices and vegetables that come from Burundi. Since the border is closed, the few products that are left have become very expensive. I don't sell anything anymore, but before my business was good.
The border closure has dealt a severe blow to the economy. This market, in a different part of town, has closed entirely. Shops have shut their doors. And Faraja Yowasi's warehouse is practically empty.
Look, I only have a few bags left. Normally, bags of flour reach the ceiling. I used to go to Burundi to buy bags of flour and sell them here, but now it's really difficult. The border really needs to reopen.
Burundi is an ally of Congo's in its fight against M23 rebels. Thousands of Burundian soldiers fight alongside Congolese forces. But the M23's presence near the border and the possibility of the conflict spilling over worries the Burundian government.
Burundi is fighting against Burundian armed groups that are present in South Kivu, notably the Red Tabara and others. So the presence of the M23 around Uvira and the potential presence of Rwandan troops is a big threat for Burundi.
The M23 withdrew from Uvira in mid-January after coming under intense diplomatic pressure. The Congolese army and pro-government militia groups have taken back control of the city, but the rebels are still dug in around Uvira and the situation remains confused. For the city's traders, hopes of the border reopening still feel a long way off. Burundian authorities have not said when or whether it will open again.
Now to South Africa, where extreme weather is leaving its mark on one of the continent's most iconic natural treasures. Kruger National Park, a flagship safari destination known around the world, has been hit hard by severe flooding, forcing closures and causing damage expected to take years and millions of dollars to repair. Torrential rains have submerged bridges, washed out roads and cut off tourist camps, even as wildlife struggles to adapt. France 24's Eunice Masson reports on a park facing a long and costly road to recovery.
Widespread flooding in South Africa has led to major disruptions. Today, the Minister for Environment announced that the damage to the Kruger National Park alone is estimated at hundreds and millions of rands. It has to be noted that this park has already seen flood damage back in 2023 and is still recovering from that. To help aid the recovery process, the Minister announced a fund called the San Parks Kruger Recovery Fund. Also, in Mozambique, flooding has led to the displacement of 500,000 of people, and it's also the government has declared a national emergency. Observers noted that this flood could be even worse than the flood back in the 2000s.
At least 13 deaths in Mozambique reported as of Thursday. Now, if you're from the younger generation and follow streaming avidly, there's no way you haven't heard of Ishowspeed. The YouTube and Twitch superstar has brought his viral energy to Nigeria, stopping in Lagos as part of his headline-grabbing African tour. Turning 21 in the city and hitting a massive 50 million subscribers, Speed drew crowds everywhere, from Balogun Market to Freedom Park, sampling jollof rice, soaking up culture and sharing it live with millions online. Named the world's most influential creator of 2025, Ishowspeed is using clicks, chaos and content to put Africa firmly on the global social media map. And it's proving effective.
Ishowspeed is showing culture, it's showing relationship, it's showing it's showing cultural difference, it's showing food, it's showing difference, it's showing the difference, and it's showing the unique part of Africans. Like, he wants the American guys to see Africa as a place they can also come to, not just seeing Africa like the way they have projected Africa in a very, very long time.
At first, I liked him because he was funny and very entertaining. But then, as he started doing these tours, he went to Asia, and then now he came here. It's showing me a different kind of person he is, that he's not just a guy coming to make everyone laugh. He can be a very impactful person, and then he can impact many things happening in the world, even positively.
Speed living life in the fast lane. Well, that's where we leave you with the news here on Iron Africa. There's more coming up on France 24.
This week on Paris Désert, the many delights of Athens. Explore the capital's cuisine with Dina Nicolaou, the ambassador of Hellenic gastronomy.
On a des oursins grecs et des huîtres sauvages grecs. C'est la mérésée, tu vois?
La mérégée dans l'assiette.
Then, embark on a true culinary journey with Michelin-starred chef Arnaud Bignon.
On va préparer ce très beau canard. On va le cuire et ensuite on va le fumer dans une boîte avec des aiguilles de pin.
Pastry chef Stelios Paliaros tells us about his revolutionary approach to Greek desserts. Valérie Fayolle takes you to Greece in Paris Désert on France 24.
Wow! Ella, bravo!
C'est délicieux.